Good morning, crime community. I'm here to read out Poisoner in Chief. It's going to come across a lot of things related to the Manson file. Ligarius, what to do? Brutus, a piece of work that will make sick men whole. Ligarius, but are not some whole that we must make sick? Brutus, we also. Shakespeare, Julius Caesar. I needed more of a challenge. Years of wandering through distant lands, never knowing who or what lies around the next bend, it is the prospect to stir any adventurous soul. During the second half of the 20th century, a few American souls were restless as that of Sidney Gottlieb. He spent his career deep inside Washington's secret world. No one knew what he did, but he seemed to have earned a fulfilled retirement. A more ordinary man might have been happy to spend his later years relaxing, reminiscing, or playing with his grandchildren. Gottlieb, however, was a psychic voyager, far from anyone's stereotype of his career civil servant. His home was an eco lodge in the woods with outdoor toilets and a vegetable garden. He meditated, wrote poetry, and raised goats. Staring at goats. Gottlieb was just 54 years old when he retired. His career ended well with a ceremony at which he was awarded a Medal of Distinguished Service. Soon afterward, he and his wife sold their home and almost everything else they owned. In the autumn of 1973, they set off to seek humanitarian adventure with spiritual fulfillment. Their plan was marvelously vague: board a freighter in San Francisco and go wherever it was going. They had little interest in seaside or conventional tourism. The Gottliebs wanted to spend their elder years serving the world's neediest people. Australia was their first stop. After a while there, they booked passage onward. A year of wandering led them to India. They landed in a hospital where victims of leprosy were treated and made their way to their volunteer. Life among the patients, they embraced the work of caring for society's cast-offs. On a summer of 1975, the message from Washington shattered Gottlieb's world. Someone had discovered who he was. The United States Senate wanted to question him. 2 decades later, at the Central Intelligence Agency, Gottlieb had directed his story's most sympathetic search for techniques of mind control. He was also the CIA's chief poison maker. His work had been shrouded in secrecy, so complete as to render him invisible. He was now being summoned home. He would be expected to accept for his deeds, possibly even to appear in public. Never could he have imagined such a twist of fortune. Soon after Gottlieb arrived in Washington, friends told him he needed a lawyer. He suggested Terry Lenzener, who had worked for the Senate Watergate Committee, right into Nixon. Gottlieb called him. After they met, Lenzener wrote, "I was in contact with Dr. Death himself." For years, Gottlieb had overseen medical experiments and special interrogation projects in which hundreds of people were tormented or many minds were permanently shattered. No one has ever plunged into the kind of work with more ambition or enthusiasm. Gottlieb justified it in all the name of science and patriotism, until the end, when his conscience finally broke through. In the years after Gottlieb's reluctant return to Washington, bits of information about his work began to emerge. He testified at 2 rounds of Senate hearings. Later, he was forced to defend himself against lawsuits filled by people who had come to suspect that they were among his victims. He revealed almost nothing but beyond the fact that they were leaving for the CIA. He had destroyed all the records of what he did. Wonderful. He was never convicted of a crime. His funeral in private was in 1999. Enough has become known about Gottlieb to tantalize ordinary writers. The New York Times published its ordinary under the circumspect leadership, Sidney Gottlieb, 80, Dies took LSD to CIA. He called Gottlieb a kind of genius, striving to explore the frontiers of the human mind for his country while searching for religious and spiritual meaning in his life. He served 2 decades as a senior scientist, presiding over some of the CIA's darkest secrets. The Los Angeles Times obituary began, James Bond had Q, the wizard who supplied 007 with dazzling gadgets to deploy against his enemy agents. The CIA had Sidney Gottlieb. Others were sharper. The iconoclastic website Counterpunch headlined its ordinary pusher assigned to pimp U.S. official poisoner dies. Another writer concludes that Gottlieb took his place among the Jekyll and Hydes of the American 20th century. Whether homesteading in Virginia, verdant hills, or safeguarding national security with another experimental torture session, Gottlieb stayed loyal to the positivist credo that the rational exploration and positive discipline will lead to good. In Britain, where obituaries are famously unrestrained and tone was biting, The Guardian called Gottlieb everything you have dreamed of in a mad scientist in a pulp novel about the CIA. And except that he was real, The Independent was living vindication of conspiracy theorists that there is nothing, however evil, pointless, or even lunatic, that unaccountable intelligence agencies will not get up to in pursuit of their secret wars. The Times was even more vivid. When Churchill spoke of a world much darker on the dark side of perverted science, he was referring to the revolting experiments conducted on human beings by Nazi doctors in the concentration camps. But he remarks might and equal justice have been applied to the activities of the CIA's Sidney Gottlieb. Indeed, what Gottlieb and his CIA henchmen did was only in degree different from the activities which had sent a number of Nazi scientists to the gallows in Nuremberg in 1946. Drugs were not Gottlieb's only weapon against the CIA enemies. He was also involved in association plots, which at a distance read like something out of a Jacobean revenge play. After the ripple of notoriety that followed his death, Gottlieb faded back into obscurity. His very few studies mention his name. One report that he was known to some of the dark sorcerers for his conjuring in the most sinister recesses of the CIA with his clubbed foot. He was perhaps too easy to caricature as a cross between a Bond villain and Dr. Strangelove. We're back to Cielo Drive again. A scientist who always wanted to push further without worrying about the morality of where it all led. In a book called The World's Worst, a guide to the most disgusting, hideous, inept, and dangerous people, places, and things on Earth, Gottlieb is mentioned as the maddest mad scientist. The author gives him grudging credit for being smart enough to work for an organization that would not only allow him to poison and murder people with such aplomb but would also protect him from the consequences awaiting any other sociopath. Gottlieb also turned up briefly in 2 modern American novels, Parabah Kingslaver's Portrait of Life in the Congo, A Poisonwood Bible, refers to his role in the CIA plot to assassinate Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba. She writes that a scientist named Dr. Gottlieb was hired to make a poison that would produce such a dreadful disease. The good doctor later testified at the hearings, if it didn't kill Lumumba outright, it would leave him so disfigured that he couldn't possibly be the leader of men. The character of Norman Mailer, here we go back to the Manson book again. Norman Mailer knows everything before it happens. He's not a CIA plant. The character of Norman Mailer's fevered history of American covert action, Harlot's Ghost, discovers a letter from a fictional CIA officer. It's always fictional when it comes to Mailer, but then it turns out to be the truth. Fictional CIA officer who raves about Gottlieb and calls him cosmic in scope, interested in everything. In the 1960s, Gottlieb rose to the top of the Technical Services Division, which makes the tools the CIA officers use. Gottlieb ran a bustling gadget shop in Washington and directed the work of several hundred scientists and technicians scattered all around the world. They crafted a mind-boggling array of spyware, from a rubber airplane to an escape kit concealed in a rectal suppository. Gottlieb and his team supplied tools of the trade to CIA officers operating in the Soviet Union and dozens of other countries. I have to say, I sent this book to somebody in prison and they wouldn't allow him to read it in prison. So this must be pretty important stuff for anybody who's in prison. Under Gottlieb's leadership, TSD built worldwide technical capabilities critical of virtually all significant U.S. clandestine operations in the last third of the 20th century. One of his successors wrote, "Yet regardless of Gottlieb's public service and personal clarity, his name will always be inextricably linked to the 10-year MK-Ultra program and the sinister implications of associated words with such drugs, LSD, assassination, and mind control." Nearly every day of the first 20 years of his life, Sidney Gottlieb passed the side entrance to James Monroe High School in the Bronx. He couldn't avoid it. The hulking school stands directly across the street from the brick row house where he and his family lived. Every time he left home, he saw the stern maxim chiseled into a triangular stone pediment above the side entrance. It was a warning from the British statesman William Pitt. Where the law ends, tyranny begins. Many who lived nearby felt the truth deeply. The neighborhood was home to a jumble of immigrants, most of them Jews who had come to America seeking refuge from oppression. Fanny and Louis Gottlieb were typical. They were Orthodox Jews of Hungarian extraction who left Central Europe early in the 20th century. In New York, Louis Gottlieb found work in the garment industry, opening up a sweatshop, and made enough money to rent half and a two-family home at 1333 Boynton Avenue. Sidney was the youngest of 4 children, born on August 3rd, 1918. He grew up in a vibrant community. The busy main drag, Westchester Avenue, is just 2 blocks away, as was a full of activity then, and it is today. Many of Sidney's classmates were like him. Smart kids from observant Jewish homes, barely removed from the immigrant experience, who seemed to observe America's offered and clamored to seize it. Like most of them, he learned Hebrew, had a bar mitzvah, and studied hard. The 2 important ways through young Sidney stood apart from his friends. First, he was born with a disformed feet. According to one relative, his mother screamed when she first saw him. For most of his children, he was unable to walk. The mother carried him everywhere. The family sweatshops brought him enough money to pay for 3 operations. They were at least partly successful. At the age of 12, the boy walked without braces for the first time. He never needed them again, but the ordeal left him a lifelong limp. The other challenge that afflicted Sidney was stuttering. He may have been in part a reaction to schoolmates who, by one account, viciously harassed him for his disability. I've been harassed for my disabilities my whole damn life. During his high school years, the young man was ostracized, physically scarred, and unable to either walk or speak normally. These handicaps might have led another teenager to withdraw into frustration or self-pity, but Sidney emerged resolute and determined to excel. After graduating from James Monroe in 1936, Sidney was like many other ambitious sons and daughters of immigrants in New York, enrolled at City College, then known as the Harvard of the Proletariat, for the excellent education it provided free of charge. He studied advanced German and won high grades in math, physics, and chemistry. He also took 2 courses in public speaking, eventually aiming to help him overcome his stuttering, exposition of rudiments of speech, and declamation of oration. He took a music course as well, the beginning of a lifelong interest in folk dancing, which he cultivated as a hobby, despite or perhaps because of the fact that he was born with club feet. City College did not offer courses in agricultural biology, the field Sidney wished to pursue. He decided to transfer to a school where it was taught seriously. The University of Wisconsin was a well-reputed program, and he wrote to inquire. He received a short but cordial reply that ended, "I shall be glad to help you in any way that I can." It was signed by Ira Baldwin, Assistant Dean to the College of Agriculture. The letter, dated February 24th, 1937, marked the beginning of a relationship that would shape history's secrets. In order to take specialized courses that would qualify him for admission to the University of Washington, Gottlieb enrolled at Arkansas Polytechnic High School, now Arkansas's Tech University. The little town of Russellville was nothing like the teeming Bronx streets of his childhood, and its new campus had none of City College's intensity. But he was able to take the courses he wanted: general botany, organic chemistry, soil conservation, elements of forestry, and principles of dairying. He sang in the Glee Club. The yearbook called him a Yankee who pleases the Southerners. According to the campus gossip columnist, he kept company with a fellow student named Vera Van Harmon. The columnist wrote, Harmon and Gottlieb seem to have a nice affair started. But wait, New York's a fur piece. Harmon, Gottlieb was already reaching beyond the confines of his experience. I had been keeping up an A average without too much difficulty to write to Ira Baldwin halfway through the school year, and am constantly preparing to work so much harder. Gottlieb's success in Arkansas won him the prize he had sought, admission to the University of Wisconsin. Baldwin welcomed him because he was a member and guided him through 2 successful academic years. He majored in chemistry, moved by conditions he had seen in New York, sweatshops, including the one his father owned. He joined the campus chapter of the Young People's Socialist League. His senior thesis was entitled Studies on Ascorbic Acid in Cow Peas. In 1948, he graduated magna cum laude. Baldwin gave him a glowing recommendation, mentioning his slight speech impediment, but raising his intellect and character. Mr. Gottlieb was a very high type of Jewish boy, he wrote. He has easily fit into the situations which he finds here and is, I think, generally liked and respected by his classmates. He was a brilliant mind and thoroughly honest and reliable, and is modest and unassuming. Gottlieb's academic achievements and Baldwin's recommendations combined to secure the young man's admission to graduate school at California Institute of Technology. He spent 3 years there, and so on June 11, 1943, he was awarded a doctorate in biochemistry. During those years, his life changed in 2 important ways. First, he met a woman vastly different from anyone who could have known him in the Bronx. Margaret Moore was the daughter of a Presbyterian preacher. She had been born and raised in India, where her father was spreading Christian gospel, but had rebelled against the missionary ethos from the early age. When Gottlieb met her, she was studying preschool education at Board Oak School in Pasadena, a branch of Whittier College. Is that where Nixon went to school? Where prospective teachers were schooled in the progressive education theories of Maria Montessori and other innovators. The two had little apparent in common, might even be seen as polar opposites, yet they shared a spiritual restlessness. Gottlieb had become estranged from the Judaism he absorbed as a child. Margaret Moore tormented her father with sharp questions about Christianity. Both yearned for an understanding of life beyond the traditional religion offers. In 1942, with World War II raging, they resolved to take their spirit quest together. Grad students were not supposed to get married, but they did anyway. Margaret told her parents in a brief note, the wedding was a sign of the couple's disregard for convention, the bare-bones civil ceremony with no guests or festivities. Get married is between 2 people and not the whole crowd, Margaret wrote. Later, she sent an addendum. Since folks went to us to have a Jewish wedding, what they're going to do, so we will have one fancy wedding anyway, and we will most certainly be married then. The bride's parents, accustomed to her independent ways, happily accepted the match. They were very excited to get the cable 17th of September saying that our Margaret married her Sidney Gottlieb on September 16th in Pasadena. Her mother wrote to relatives after hearing the news. If she had to teach and he had to do work for the government, they could undoubtedly be better food for doing it together. How many arrangements had been altered for the duration, and of each had each other. They were indeed fortunate in this world full of sorrow. The other formative event that shaped Gottlieb during his years in California was his rejection by the civil service system. He was halfway through the graduate school when the Japanese attacked on Pearl Harbor. brought the United States into World War II. Other students quit school and volunteered for military service, but Gottlieb remained in Caltech until completing his PhD in 1943, when he sought to enlist, having convinced himself that his limp would not disqualify him. When the Army turned him down, he was crushed. I wanted to do my share in the war effort, he said later. I felt I had a duty to service, and I couldn't convince anyone that I would not be hampered by my performance. Denied the chance to wear a military uniform, Gottlieb resolved to find another way to serve. In the fall of 1943, him and Margaret moved to Tacoma Park, Maryland, a suburb of Washington. He found a job researching the chemical structure of organic soil in the Department of Agriculture. Later, he transferred to the Food and Drug Administration, where he developed tests to measure the pressure of drugs in the human body. He became prominent enough to be called an experienced expert witness in several court cases. I enjoyed my FDA time, but the work most repetitive and something pretty monotonous, he later recalled. I needed more of a challenge. He sought it actively. In 1948, he found a new job at the National Research Council, part of the nonprofit National Academic of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. He had studied plant diseases and fungible and was also, as he later recalled, expressing some of the interesting work concerned ergot alkaloids as vasoconstrictors and hallucinogens. Soon afterward, his job changed again, becoming a research associate at the University of Maryland, devoting to studying the metabolism of fungi. By this time, he had found a very old and primitive cabin near Vienna, Virginia, Margaret wrote in later years. It had no electricity or water or any of that fancy stuff, but it sat under the very magnificent oak trees, and we saw it, and I said, "This will be my home, Sid. I've grown up in New York City where I was nuts, and I was persuaded him that I knew how to live this way, and it was possible. So we borrowed money from all our friends to make a down payment, and we moved into our 2 babies and our few possessions." And this is how close I am to the families. The babies, one of the babies' name was Stephen Gottlieb. That was the father of my friend. That's how close I am that I have children related to these people from being in the MK Ultra breeder program. A relative who spent 4 days with the young family during this period wrote a glowing account of their life in a letter to his parents. Margaret's whole situation is most unusual and interesting. 19 acres of pine forest in Virginia with a little log cabin in the midst thereof, about 20 miles from Washington, D.C., he reported. Sid is a grand man, full of energy and initiative and brains, and a perfect gentleman and host, and never a dull moment. He has just taken a job with the University of Maryland as a research chemist. His own boss in his own lab with a special arrangement to work with a problem with wood for the Navy. Penny 4 and Raphael 1 are beautiful, angelic children. They have an interesting group of friends, and the future looks rosy for them. Margaret seemed very natural and was obviously very happy. She's just as keen on the country life as Sid is, and no one needs to feel sorry for her one bit, but only glad. The Gottliebs had 2 more children, both boys. There are so many nice names that we can't use them because Sid folks are Jewish. They would be hurt if we wouldn't choose something like John or Mary. Margaret wrote to her mother, these boys were named Peter and Stephen. Gottlieb was settled comfortably into family life. Sid is pitching in more than he ever has before, and his wonderful Margaret wrote while she was nursing one of her infants, I feel guilty sleeping with him. He has only to milk the goats. Despite the satisfying family life, Gottlieb was frustrated. He had no clear path out of his mid-level research on pharmaceuticals and agricultural chemicals. His mentor from the University of Wisconsin, Ira Baldwin, had guided one former student into exciting work during the war, but Gottlieb had been too young. Everything suggested that he was headed for a career as a government scientist. As so he was, but he could not have imagined that a phantasmagorical kind of science would be called to practice. This is just the first chapter of the beginning of The Poisoner in Chief. Sidney Gottlieb, they want to make a Quentin Tarantino movie out of it. So we never quite get away from the Manson file, do we? No, we're going to get more involved with the Manson story as this story goes on. It's all connected, folks. So if you like anything and think I'm speaking any truth here, please like and subscribe.